Welcome, everyone. So I'm super excited about today's bonus session. It's going to be focused on ZK things. Let's start by introducing the guest speakers. Let's spotlight both of them. Cool. So today we have Developer and Lakshman. I don't know if you want to go by Tracy, so you let me know,
Tracy's
Tracy.
fine,
Introduce yourself. But essentially, both Lakshman and Tracy are portfolio founders, and they're both specifically working in zero knowledge. They're both doing different things, and I'll let them introduce themselves. But they're two of the smartest people that I know, especially in ZK, and have been spending a lot of time thinking about both the developer accessibility layer as well as interesting use cases when it comes to consumer applications of ZK. So without further ado, let's get started. I want this session to be super low key and casual. We have a bunch of topics that I want to go over, but as always, if you guys have questions, put them in the chat. And we're going to keep this conversational, almost like a live podcast, and kind of have everyone in the group share out answers. So I'll pass it over to Lakshman if you want to introduce yourself and Personae.
Sure. I'm Lakshman. I work on Personae. Candidly, we're still figuring out exactly who we are, but we've been kind of experimenting with a bunch of different applications that allow people to make zero knowledge proofs about things that they do on chain. I think we initially started experimenting with kind of we had this Twitter bot called Hanon that was sort of past cultural events could post pseudonymously to this Twitter bot. We then started working a little bit with a Nouns DAO and building some stuff in there. I've recently started to think that I'm sure we'll go into this later, that may not be exactly the right user to focus on. So we're sort of shifting our focus a little bit now, but continue to kind of be experimenting with the same ideas. And yeah, that's kind of what we're doing now.
Developer, do you want to go next?
Hey everyone, I'm Tracy. Developer is my Twitter handle, so sometimes I get referred to by that. So I'm the co-founder of Pluto. I've been working on that for a little while now. And we are working on making Snarks more accessible to application developers. One of our insights when we started learning ZK ourselves was that it could be used to design a spectrum of applications. So new things around privacy or longer running computation or access to historic state blockchains, all of these things are kind of not possible without ZK. And we felt that it was a big new design space for applications, but we didn't see a lot of applications using it. And when I talked to a lot of founders that were trying to use this in their products, one of the learnings from that was that it's just super hard to build a product because you have to master so many different mysterious arts of discrete math and cryptography to get it working well. And we thought that was not right. There should be some way to level up this experience so that the average developer can use it to create an interesting application without having to master everything underneath. And so that's kind of been our North Star for the last 7-8 months. And we're trying to build the necessary software to build that platform. And that includes building a virtual machine for executing code in a Snark, and several other things. So nice to meet you all.
Thank you both. And one thing that I think is really interesting is that both of you guys are very much early stage founders as well. And this is kind of where a lot of the Variant Founder Fellows are coming from. So I think you guys kind of went through a similar product ideation processes and navigating the idea maze, both of you, as a lot of the founders are going through now. So I think later on in the conversation, that's something I definitely want to touch on as well, beyond just ZK things. But we'll get to that at the end. I think first, I'd love to start off with just really basic ZK 101 things so that everyone's on the same page. And then we can move on into the more interesting use cases and what excites you and all of that. So I guess let's start off with ZK is obviously a really hot topic in crypto right now. But I'm curious, in your own words, how would you describe zero knowledge and zero knowledge proofs? And either one of you can start.
I have one. Lakshman, I'm sure you have one. The way I think about this is a ZK snark is a method to decouple computation from like a specific time and specific location for where it's computed, and while being able to make commitments about the correctness and the privacy of that computation. So it's an object for doing that.
Yeah, I think I've thought about, what this is in terms of like two affordances. And I think this is what a lot of people frame it as, is like succinctness and zero knowledge. And so succinctness to me is like, you can kind of prove the execution of any Turing decidable program in a much smaller size than the length of the computation itself. So, so you can kind of like scale computation verification. And how much it scales differs across systems. It may be constant size. It may be anything sublinear is interesting. So it's like constant size or log n usually. And then I think a lot about, and the thing we focus on, or how we position what we care about in terms of the systems we explore and things like that, is the zero knowledge side is, you can prove such a computation while not proving everything about the inputs. And that seems to have like pretty profound implications in the very long term about how kind of communication changes online. And that's in coordination in general. And that's kind of what we find the most fascinating.
Got it. So I guess in like really simple words, is it right to say that zero knowledge is basically it's a type of math, type of cryptography that lets you prove to someone that that a given, piece of information or statement or whatever is true without necessarily giving up any specific information beyond the fact that it's true?
I think there's like a good one really cool paper I read about this is about this concept called mixed nets. And the idea is like, you given a set, you want to shuffle the set and make some commitment that you shuffled it correctly, that you didn't cheat the shuffling, and not reveal how you shuffled it to like another party. And there's this like really cool extraction of like how to do this process. And it shows that you can actually have one computer prove to another computer that this thing works without the other computer getting any knowledge of it. And it's like this like breakthrough understanding for me that I really appreciated.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, if you could link that later, I'd love to share that with the fellows.
I will, yeah.
What do you think are some like common misconceptions that people have about zero knowledge proofs and its applications as it relates to like blockchains?
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of conflation of terms. I don't know if others are old enough, but it feels kind of like, we're seeing this in AI today, but like previous AI, I guess like big data meant like nothing. And I think like zero knowledge is starting to mean like nothing. Like zero knowledge is a property that some of these crypto systems can have, but not all of them have. But we use zero knowledge proof to mean a bunch of different things at the same time. I think a lot of people take it to mean credible short commitment of computation, which technically is like, it's an intersecting thing, but it's not quite the same thing. And so, we could definitely make this sort of, it would be fun to have like a sort of semantic conversation about like what are the terms, but in general, I think there's just a lot of conflation of terms. Zero knowledge means everything and nothing all at once a little bit.
You see this with like founders and researchers in ZK getting increasingly specific about like what they're talking about. They're like, I'm talking about a snark. I'm not talking about a ZK dash snark. And the whole space just like, that's just ZK. It's this like vague cryptography thing. This is happening. It happens with AI as well. That's a good example. So my past life was more ML engineering, but I like refuse to use the phrase AI because it's just been like taken over by all these concepts that aren't to me machine learning. And I'm like, this is all just like teaching a computer to learn. It's not AI.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And I've noticed that there's also like, so especially in crypto, there's like two main applications, right? There's like ZK when it comes to like scalability, which is like what you hear about when it comes to like rollups and things like that. And then there's ZK as it relates to like privacy or identity or like all of the other stuff that we're talking about. And I think both camps have kind of created their own like dictionary of words almost. And so you can be working in ZK, but work on completely different things and have no idea what the other side is talking about.
Yeah, 100%. I think it'll be. We're starting to see this now. In that it maybe we haven't figured out the right terms, but different people are working on different proving systems that have like somewhat different properties over time. And I imagine that over time we'll find better, more precise language for these different things. Yeah, based on whether you're working on something that is like more around the privacy identity, or whether you're working on something that's trying to scale a blockchain. The language will probably separate over time.
Oh yeah,
I also
go
think
ahead.
the hype about ZK is sort of masking what I think is like a broader renaissance in kind of new cryptography and attempts to apply cryptography to new problems. So people even use ZK to encapsulate things like multi-party computation and FHE and some of these concepts. I think ZK has become like the AI buzzword of advancements in cryptography right now, even, which is even more egregious than just the privacy versus the sickness distinction.
That is such an important part of it. I was going to take the conversation in a different way, but I'm going to get back to that in a second. I'd love to hear from you. Like, what do you think are the most interesting applications of all this new cryptography, not just like ZK as an umbrella?
For me personally, I'm excited about like types of private interactions between parties on the internet. I think there's like a whole new space of private DeFi applications that can be designed and built that don't exist today, but actually preserve like hard privacy between parties. I'm also excited about like statements about computation that you can make. So like in a blockchain today, if you do some computation in consensus, it's very limited because all the nodes in the consensus have to repeat that computation. So you have a tiny amount of compute you can do. Like 500K gas is like what you can maybe do on like an average user transaction in ETH that would be acceptable. But if you can make much longer statements about that computation, you get more descriptive applications. And this kind of opens that design box up in a big way, especially if you have performance snarks. So I think I'm excited to see how people use that new design space to build new applications.
Definitely. Is there anything you want to add, Lakshman?
I totally agree.
Great. One thing before I guess we get like even deeper into more like semantics and very specific use cases, I think it'd be great to hear more about both of your personal journeys and kind of how you both got your start in ZK. You have some interesting like differences in how you got into crypto and ZK, but also a lot of overlap. Like both of you are very strongly in like the nouns ecosystem, and like Tracy, that's kind of like how you got your start in the space. And then Lakshman, you have like a really great experiment with Hey and Noun. So I'd love for you to like go into that. Maybe Lakshman, you can start.
Yeah, sure. So actually, got started thinking about ZK quite early, and then shifted away because it felt like the time was too early. So actually started playing with snarks, with Groth 16 snarks in like 2018, 2019. I think when I think at some point Vitalik tweeted out that like, oh, you can make a mix. This is pre-Tornado Cash. Like, oh, you can make a mixer if you verify a ZK snark in a smart contract. And I just thought that was like really bizarre. I had used like the old style of mixers in the past, and I was like, wait, what? You can just do this and everyone can see it, but like it still works.
Was this back when you were at the Ethereum Foundation?
Yeah, so that led to me actually ending up at the Ethereum, like, you know, going through the rabbit hole a bit, ended up meeting sort of Barry Whitehat and some of the folks who were like doing the applied ZK stuff there now. That is now called the Privacy and Scaling Exploration Group, the PSE. Because I was just like, I was just hacking on Ethereum stuff and ended up, you know, just through hacking on that, there was like a very small number of people who were thinking about that stuff. And so ended up just meeting all of them very quickly, and kind of ended up working for that group for a little while, just experimenting on applied ZK. Funnily enough, actually, that group has sort of forked, hence privacy and scaling explorations. Like that group sort of forked into a group that thinks about things like RELP, and a group that thinks about just like purely like private social stuff. But then kind of shifted my attention away. This, you know, I think this is like a little pre DeFi summer. And so it just like wasn't super obvious at the time was right to do interesting things, verifying zero knowledge proofs on chain, because it wasn't obvious that people would use chains yet. But was like super fascinated by Ethereum. So I ended up working on ETH2 then, you know, kind of like in the merge and stuff like that, shifted my attention away. But yeah, basically after that experience, got really excited about zero knowledge proofs, because I realized, wow, now blockchains feel like they're becoming a part of society. And the earlier thoughts I had about zero knowledge and its role in future internet society is like, oh, it seems more plausible now. Now is maybe a good time to go think about that. So that's what pulled me back in before starting Personae, maybe a couple of years ago when I started jumping into the IDMAs, was a thesis about what happens when like a very large amount of the things we do online is recorded on some chain-like thing that is verifiable, and anyone can make a ZK statement about the things they're doing on those places. That felt like a different thing than the internet today, and kind of wanted to just go deep and try to figure out what that was. That's what Personae is about. Part of that was, I think, trying to understand who are the users who are like living in the future. There's that William Gibson quote, "People invoke, the future is here, just not evenly distributed." And I think there's a lot of truth to that. There are small pockets of like, we all want the mainstream retail user. But the reality is the people who are experiencing the thing that we expect more people to experience in the future are like the small number of people. And we're all trying to find those people. And so that's actually what led me to Nouns DAO. I had a few friends in Nouns, and so I got involved, and I was like, oh, this actually feels different and interesting. And I want to try to make things that allow these people to speak pseudonymously their mind, that sort of like kind of get involved in governance in new ways. And so that's kind of what led to Nouns DAO. I think more recently, obviously everyone's like now paying attention to friend tech, but that's also got me thinking about other groups of users. I think it's telling kind of like what types of users are using friend tech a lot. I also think like bot users are quite interesting and underappreciated. Thinking a lot,
like as in like people who make bots.
Yeah. So like long tail searchers have one future user property that I think is true of long tail searchers, and also like a lot of Ethereum people who have been around for a while, but isn't obvious, is that you kind of accumulate a lot of addresses over time that you interact with. And I think this is sort of inevitable. Like, like friend tech, for example, like you create a new address, right? Like it's so easy to create a new address. The notion that one user, one address is like what we should expect in the future seems like a skeuomorphism a little bit, sort of analogizing too much with the past, when it's like asymmetric key cryptography means that one can create an address costlessly. And so personally, I have like, just from being around and playing with chains for a long time, I have tens of addresses that I control. And many of the searchers I talk to naturally control hundreds of addresses. So, I think the end user technology that focuses on that group of users, and this is maybe a little controversial, so maybe I'm inviting some pushback, probably should assume multi-address in part of like how users interact with the chain.
Oh, totally. I think that there's so much wrong with how crypto data science works, and like how a lot of people measure metrics by like number of active addresses, which is crazy because like literally everyone has multiple addresses. So I think it'll lead to some interesting use cases around that as well. And then really quickly before we go to Tracy's bio, I'd love to hear if you could like describe Hey Noun a little bit more, and just like the bare bones, like what was the experiment, what were you trying to enable, and how does it help the community?
Yeah, so I can, I don't want to like shill the things I built too much, but
no, shill it. That's why you're here.
I'll just share these two links. There's sort of like these two message boards. So Hey Noun was kind of our first experiment, and they both have Twitter accounts linked. So if you just like search for the Twitter account, you can also find the Hey Noun one that posts messages from that. And it's sort of like, if people have seen Coinfessions, Hey Noun is built from like Coinfessions, but with a proof that you are a nouner. So very, very simple. And Nouns Nims is an experiment kind of like beyond. So it's the idea being that one of the things I observed being a nouner in like the first couple of weeks and just kind of participating in governance and thinking through what was going on was something that a lot of nouners call like governance fatigue, which is, we're sort of participating in this online discourse around the governance of this treasury. And we have somewhat public profiles. And so there's like some amount of work in deciding how you want to express an opinion that may affect governance. And so sometimes you don't say like there are things that remain unsaid because it's just like a lot of work, energy required to figure out how you would say it to fit sort of your political sort of like name or something like that. And so that kind of led me down the thesis of, maybe if people had like an appropriate credible pseudonym, which presumably requires sometimes zero knowledge proof to kind of remain pseudonymous while having some credibility, that would allow them to speak more freely and kind of like, what is the form factor of that thing? And so Hey Noun was the simplest thing, which is just a single message board. Nouns Nims is kind of an iteration on that, which, candidly, I'm realizing actually probably isn't the right form factor. Like it was an experiment that I think isn't quite right. But the idea was, can we create like a tangible, reusable pseudonym that allows people to express things kind of like more continuously and like reply to other pseudonyms and stuff like that. And so all built using zero knowledge proofs in the background.
So if I can summarize in my own words, so like Hey Noun was an experiment of being like, oh, I want to like have the reputation of like, oh, I own like 3 nouns, 4 nouns, or just 1 noun, and prove that I own them. But I don't want to disclose who I am, but I want to be able to express my like political opinions on a forum. And then Noun Nims was kind of like a extension upon that, where you can like accrue some sort of reputation and identity without, again, giving up too much of who you are.
Yeah, I think part of this journey from like the like product application side is there are probably some like new interaction things we'll figure out and doing stuff here. But we're kind of like retracing the path of like normal social stuff and kind of like rebuilding things from scratch. So it was actually, it required like a little bit of innovation even to figure out how to get a consistent identity from which you could like reply and like people would know it's the same person, but not know who it is. So that was sort of like the shift. And one realization from Hey Noun was, okay, people are posting occasionally, but not being able to reply or like know it's the same person saying something is weird. People were sort of like, would be like, oh, I was that person from this previous post, and like link the tweet to the Hey Noun post or something. It was like very, very indirect. And so we're trying to like iterate on that. I don't think we got it right this time. So we're kind of back in the lab a little bit now, but that's a little bit of what the journey's been.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I am excited to go deeper into talking about like that whole like identity piece as well. But something you said that I found was interesting was it's like you're like constantly looking at these experiments and seeing like whether this is like the right way for users to experience what you're trying to build. And I think, Tracy, you have a lot of experience with that. Like you went from like, NFT bidding stuff to like multi-sig wallets to now you're building like ZK developer tooling and working in like the ZK VM space. So could you talk about like, your entire journey going from big tech to all of that and how you ended up where you are right now?
Yeah, sure. It's a bit of a journey after all. I used to work at Stripe and Uber, like these big consumer tech companies, and I'd done that for years. And I had kind of like started to get bored with that phase of my career. I didn't feel there was anything exciting and interesting and new I could do in consumer tech. And kind of one of my weekend hobbies during that time was like paying attention to what was going on in crypto. And back in like 2017, like I remember hearing about ETH and Bitcoin, and everyone was talking about it. And I had a friend who convinced me to like get really deep on it. And I looked at everything and I thought, oh, these blockchain things are kind of cool. But there's like no way to build any application. There's nothing interesting to be done with them. They're essentially a speculative asset. I thought that was interesting. Like the fact that you can have internet money, but you couldn't like create any new internet applications on top of that. And so I kind of like sidelined that and didn't really think about it for a few years. And then during DeFi summer, I started seeing like Maker and Uniswap, and like I had like this aha moment, like, oh wow, you can actually do really creative and cool things that you couldn't do before with money. And I was like deep in the heart of Stripe, like working with the existing financial system and like working with Visa. And that experience, I feel like it was like a really stark contrast between like how much energy Stripe puts into making some tiny improvement to like the way Visa works. It's like dozens of engineers working for a year to like make it a little bit easier to do something on Visa, versus like how easily I could like program money and do something really creative and cool in nouns in like 4 hours. And this like contrast between like the programmability and flexibility of these different like payment and money tools just like stood out to me a lot and got me really excited. And that was the thing that eventually made me like leave my job and start kind of like focusing more on crypto. And one of the first things I got excited about was like Nouns, which was like shortly after I left my job, I like joined Nouns and started getting more interested in that community because a lot of these like communities at the time were just similar to what you saw in 2017, just like getting excited about a token price going up, right? And that's all well and good, but there wasn't much intention to do something long term. And I think the Nouns had this like very deliberate intention to like sort of store this treasury and try to do long term things with it and try to think longer term about it. I thought that was really interesting, and it was going to play out as an interesting social experiment on chain because of that. And so I got involved super early there and built this thing called Nouns Party, which was like group bidding on nouns, kind of inspired by some things that were happening at the time with Party DAO. We just tried to make like a nouns native group buying experience. And we actually bought like one noun through that, but it did become like a core part of the protocol, which was, I think, our initial intention. Maybe someday, but I think there's like securities concerns around like the regulation for nouns and other things that probably prevent them from doing that. But that got us into the community, got us excited about the community, got us building like applications. And actually, I had like this experience early in Nouns where I was, after we had spent some time there, I decided like, I'm going to sell the noun and I'm going to move on to other things because I wasn't going to continue building in the nouns community. I had sort of like learned what I wanted to learn, but I wasn't keen to keep going. And I sold the noun to another anonymous individual. So like we had this like relatively valuable NFT and we were doing this transaction anonymously over the internet, and I had no like remediation. If like my counterparty did something and somehow had like got me to send it to an escrow contract that was his, and he upgraded the escrow contract, stole the noun. And so like it was this really unique internet experience for me where like I've been on the internet since I was 11, like playing World of Warcraft and like obsessing over all the minutia of how the internet works and interacting with pseudonymous players in those games. And for the first time, this was like me doing like real money stuff in the internet in that weird internet way that you can only do it if you're like playing World of Warcraft or something. And I was sending this noun from my wallet to this escrow contract, and I had to like read the whole contract to make sure it was going to actually escrow it correctly and escrow his correctly. And at the end, we would actually swap these two assets. And I remember like spending like 6 hours just making sure this one transaction would go through. But it was like a pretty profound moment for me because I think that was like an experience that I think a lot more people will have over the next many years as like the primitives for doing this type of thing start to level up and we start to get more comfortable with them, and you can express like more complex transactions like that. It made me pretty excited, I guess. And that was one thing I took away from Nouns. And then, yeah, I think for the company, it's just been a process of like finding the thing that our team is best suited to do. So my co-founder and I, we're a team of 4 people. We're all engineers. We come from like a really technical background, and we're really excited about doing like hard technical things. It's like what gets us out of bed in the morning. And I've always been like excited about computers in general. And I think we've been trying to find a mission that we were really excited about that aligned with like what we're good at too. And I think we saw ZK as like this mysterious kind of like hidden thing in crypto that nobody really understood quite well. And I thought it was curious because in my head, like as somebody who's been using computers forever, I thought I knew everything a computer could do at this point. Like I the basics, I got them all figured out. I've been, and I remember like hearing about ZK and being like, nah, computers can't do that. Like that doesn't, like this doesn't square. Like I know what they can do and they can't do this thing. And so I got really curious and just kind of started digging a little bit. And eventually it just became like all consuming. And I remember like realizing it would work and having this insight, like this will be useful in some way to a lot of what happens in the future of the internet, especially if the future of the internet involves digital money. Like being able to express statements about a bunch of different wallets and like what you want to transfer from those wallets and like the necessary signatures to transfer them in like one succinct commitment, and then being able to like email that to somebody and them being able to like use that to like unpack all the details of that and execute it. Like something like this exists in the future of the internet. And I just started to feel like ZK was like unlocking a new thing you could do on the internet and with computers that wasn't possible before. And And then I think the timing was really good because over the last 5 years, a lot of work has went into the research of like making a ZK object a possible thing. So like I can instantiate a Snark and it does what it's supposed to do and it's verifiable. Like that wasn't really possible 5 years ago. And over the last 5 years, a lot of work's been done on the fundamental research to kind of bring it to the point you can do that performantly. But all the teams that worked on that over the last 5 years, they're now these big blockchain companies. They're doing ZK EVMs and privacy rollups and privacy blockchains. And they've got these big missions and they're all like cool missions and they're working on them. But nobody's like thinking about the curious aspects of ZK anymore. Like, what can we do that's new and novel and unique in the internet now that this thing exists and is performant? And so there's a bunch of good research out there that you can kind of take advantage of to build these new things. And that makes me pretty excited. Yeah.
That was such a good
Sorry, I
ZK
ranted.
Kill little blurb right there. I love that. I guess kind of like on that point, like where do you guys think most of the innovation is happening like right now in ZK? Is it at like the hardware level where you can like start doing these things a lot more performantly? Or do you think it's more like at the application level? And specifically when it comes to applications, is it like privacy stuff? Is it like identity stuff that you're talking about? I'm curious what your guys' takes there are.
I'll let Lakshman go because I just went for a bit.
Yeah, sure. I honestly haven't followed much at the hardware level because I think that it's like, my interpretation of the sort of like the thrust to make zero knowledge proof systems more performant is to just kind of like basically every zero knowledge proof proving statement is to these two operations as a fast Fourier transforms and multiscalar multiplications. And so a lot of these sort of, we don't need to go into what that is, but a lot of these proving systems are just trying to like understanding how those two operations would break down into like, how you distribute them across a chip or something like that. Like kind of like different versions of like making those things, like composing those things in different ways. I think in other words, it's like most of the performance innovation seems to be at the proving system level, but I also, there may be a blind spot for me here. I may not be seeing some cool hardware stuff that's happening that I just haven't paid attention to. Like for example, there's been one of the interesting trends that we're actually paying a lot of attention to and trying to stay involved with is sort of the evolution of this thing called the lookup, which is essentially adding kind of like a universal, like almost like hash table, like lookup table into your ZK program thing that makes a certain operation very fast. And so, for example, there's still some operations for which it's like we want to have like bespoke ZK systems that don't use lookups, but eventually over some period of time, lookups will probably catch up. And so that curve is something I think a lot about at the performance level. Maybe that's the hardware. Moving up the stack a little bit, I think the vast majority of capital and attention is thinking about scaling VMs and VM operations. There's which I think sort of makes sense. I think we know that if we can solve this problem well and get people to use our system, we can scale blockchains, which we know are quite important and have a lot of economic throughput. I think outside of that, we think about making so that specific operation has certain implications about proving system and stuff like that. And then I would argue a lot of attention in proving system is based around that. I would say there are like two other little satellites, which are kind of interesting right now, but I think I'm biased, but I think it'll be much more interesting in the future as we figure out what to do. And so like Tracy, I would advocate, like, I think there's a lot of room to kind of like go into like application R&D and just like think about what can be done and experiment. But one is sort of the stuff we're thinking about, which is like sort of private statements about like some cryptographic statement, i.e. like what's happened on a blockchain. And the other is like all this ZKML stuff, like private statements about like the either the training step or the inference step of an ML model. And these two problems actually have like different implications on the proving system as well. So yeah, that's my very rough mental model. Happy to kind of like dig into specific parts of it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I would love to start with like the application level stuff, but I think there's some interesting questions in the chat. So I wanted to turn it over there for just a second, specifically with Cody's question. Maybe can we spotlight Cody really quick? So basically, yeah, he's talking about like hurdles. So do you want to like ask your question really quick?
Yeah. So assuming that I'm like proficient in writing zero knowledge proofs and all the tooling that's involved, what are some of the hurdles that I'm likely to face when I'm actually building an application using ZK proofs?
You want to deploy an application and it uses a ZK proof, and like, what are the challenges going to be in doing that? So,
yeah, like what are some of the common things that developers will hit along the way, assuming that it's not related to the developer's user experience?
I think the biggest challenges probably, I'll rail off some, are like security. So it's very easy to make mistakes in ZK proofs that can like invalidate kind of everything that you're doing. So how do you ensure that the circuit you're describing is fully constrained? This is like a big concern for developers. Security performance. So like right now, if you're generating a snark about like a complex statement, it can take a lot of time. So it can take like many minutes to generate a snark about even simple statements. Like you want to verify a signature, and that signature has a catch check around it. I mean, Persona knows this one well. Has a catch check around it. It can take minutes to generate just like one of those signature verifications. So you're like have a pretty limited budget of what you can do inside of a snark and what sort of commitments or statements you can make with it. Yeah, and I guess like the flexibility of that's developer UX. Those two come to mind: performance and security.
On the security side, I think this stuff is actually particularly nefarious relative to something like smart contract development, because of like soundness bugs in particular. So I think generally it's like we think of, there's like soundness bugs and completeness bugs. Soundness bugs meaning like kind of false positives, completeness bugs are false negatives. There's no way for the system, like if there's a false negative, presumably the person can kind of like call out that it's a false negative, like, and like reveals information. There's no way for a system built on zero knowledge proofs to later detect that there was a soundness bug, like that someone that created a false positive that was just based on an under constrained circuit or something like that. And so that makes like, if we sort of extrapolate what we observe from like the world of like DeFi hacks forward, it's like that kind of thing. Like it would be that we just wouldn't be able to figure out if there were like faulty proofs until, like after the fact, until we somehow figured out. And even if we figured out like, oh, the circuit's unconstrained, we wouldn't be able to find out what the false activity was. And so it's a very, it's actually the kind of thing that like stresses me out quite a bit. It's like, I think as soon as we make something where there's like money at stake, it feels like quite scary and quite different, scary in a different way. And I think obviously, now ZK auditing is starting to become a hotter area, but it's a very immature space so far.
Yeah, there's like barely any audit firms that even do that. I think another related question on the flip side is like, okay, assuming like developer UX is like the biggest bottleneck, there's been like a bunch of solutions out there on like creating a bunch of different languages. So Isaac had a question around that. Can we spotlight him and have him ask it?
Yeah, my question is basically, so we're working on something ZK related. So we're trying to sort of like, I haven't worked with it prior to like 2 weeks ago. So we're sort of trying to speed run and get used to the ecosystem and everything. And my question was basically like looking around. So there are these new languages like Noir and Lurk, and these seem to generally fall under this category of like recursive snark languages. And my question is like, from a technical perspective, do these languages allow you to do anything versus previously where you're writing in like CIRCOM or something like this? Do they allow you to accomplish technical things that were like impossible or like very difficult to do if you're just writing in straight Circom? And then I guess more generally, where do you see the development of the higher level language ecosystem for snarks in general? Say like, I don't know, 5 years out or something like this.
I guess one thing that I would add is just because like everyone here for context, developer and Lakshman, like all the founders here are working on like very different verticals. Some are in consumer, some are in DeFi, some are in infrastructure. So it would be helpful to even just give a high level framing of like, okay, what is Circom? And then what are all of these other languages trying to do?
Yeah, I can take a stab at this. So the high level view of these higher level languages, I guess, is there are a handful of them: Circom, Noir, Socrates, Cairo. That's kind of the ones that come to mind. And I got Lurk is another. I would say that Lurk is a little bit different, but at least within like Circom, Noir, I think the capabilities are actually pretty similar. They use proof systems that have like slightly different characteristics, but like what you can do with them, I would say is pretty close. Lurk, I don't know intimately, but my understanding is they're using a construction Nova, which lets you do longer computations in Lurk, and it's more of a Lisp language than these other ones. So you might be able to do some computations in that Circom and Noir and Socrates wouldn't be able to do, but I don't know the exact bounds of the box on that one. And yeah, what do I think the 5-year view of this looks like? I don't think developers will learn a ZK-centric language. I think they'll program in their traditional languages, maybe with an SDK, some sort of abstraction for expressing what they want in there, but I don't know that they'll be using a DSL necessarily.
I was going to say there's like, we don't, and I know some researchers have thought about this a little bit, but no one has, I think, really figured it out. But there isn't a universal representation across like different types of circuits. Generally it's like there's R1CS and Plonkish arithmetizations that are the most widely used among like snarks. Snarks also is, by the way, like not a great term anymore because most starks are actually kind of snarks, but whatever. And I think people are thinking about that, but and I'm sure Aztec actually with Noir is sort of thinking in that direction a little bit as well. But yeah, we don't have like LLVM really. I think I also think that while there are like programming concepts from normal programming that'll transfer over and be really nice at a higher level language, the sort of the stuff I was talking about earlier with like the kind of soundness challenge of writing constraints, I think needs to sort of like be present in the language, which to me suggests like maybe it ends up looking like there's just like some native decorator type that is like super, super important to use or something, but like something will be different, I think, about the languages for that reason, because I think that needs to be, it's like much more crucial to get that right.
Guys,
yeah.
Do you guys worry that it's going to be one of those things where there's just like so many standards that there isn't a standard? Like I feel like a lot of these languages are optimizing for very niche specific things, but I don't know if that's necessary like for most applications.
But yeah, there's two things. So one, I think there will be teams that continue to focus on like very detailed cryptographic statements that you are making for some specific privacy application, for example, and they maybe will use a more sophisticated tool than a developer who wants to like make a statement about a more general computation that doesn't necessarily need to preserve privacy in all the perfect ways. So like one example, that's like trading against a pool where you can't just like one-to-one trade against the pool because then you lose the privacy of the quantity that was traded against the pool. So you need to like build a small set and then trade that whole set against the pool. And these like very application specific things you need to think of when using ZK for privacy. But on the other hand, just making kind of statements about computation that are succinct and portable, but don't necessarily need to make complex privacy statements, I think that will largely be in the realm of high level languages. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's actually a good segue. I wanted to go back into the application layer, and this like privacy part is, I think, is a good segue into Natalie's question. Natalie, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, I was just curious. Sorry, I worked actually in privacy for 5 years prior to what I'm doing now and getting into the crypto space at Palantir, and so I've seen a lot of privacy implementations, mainly at the enterprise level and then the government level. And so I'm just curious, kind of, how does this go mass market generally, and like, what does that look like, and how should we be thinking about it? Like, are we thinking about like personal attestations as an identity layer? Are we thinking about, companies using this and having it be a differentiator in the market? I know it's way higher level than we're talking about, right? With snarks and proofs and all that, but would just love your thoughts on that, 5-10 years from now.
I think about this a lot, actually. I think I hate the term privacy for this reason, because I think privacy isn't like really an emotional like user affordance. I think a lot about, I think, I forget who coined this, but someone in like Web2 VC land, or maybe Web2 consumer startup land, like said that like every consumer startup needs to allow a user to perform one of the 7 deadly sins or something like that. It's like, and while I personally, have like some of those, Reid Hoffman, some of those like crypto libertarian feels, and I care about, sort of maintaining sovereignty and stuff like that. It's very obvious to me that privacy is not such a thing. I think that my personal thesis, and, obviously, I'm biased because I'm like sort of, my job is to sort of live this thesis, is that zero knowledge, like the private part of zero knowledge unlocks like more nuanced expression between people. It's kind of like, I think it'll feel like the thing that comes out will feel more like a Snapchat type of like, oh, things are more ephemeral, not as tied to my past identity. It allows me to be more free and open online and express things that I couldn't otherwise. I doubt that it's going to be like mass adoption happens from something that is like, because it's private, you use it, it's because it feels different, because you can be different people and you can sort of like change who you are more fluidly, and in so doing express things. And when I say express things, I mean also sort of like do financial things, with like your reputation kind of like more fluidly. So yeah, I think the deadly sin, I guess, one of the deadly sins I'm thinking about right now a lot is pride. It's like, I think, which is one that people often associate with reputation, the ability to sort of like carry reputation around and make more credible statements under different voices feels like something that is like more likely to create a lot of user activity than just the notion that, the almost like paternalistic responsibility to be private or something, which I think is not the right route.
That's a really interesting point. Thanks for the question, Natalie. I feel like privacy as like the biggest selling point we've seen time and time again just doesn't work, especially in crypto. Like, I remember one of my first, I guess, interactions with like ZK stuff was back in like 2017 with like Zcash, for example. And that just like didn't work. So I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on that or commentary on things in crypto that focus on privacy first.
I will say that like if I see, when I look at startups also, like either friends or like considering an angel or something like that, it's like if I see the words privacy or ZK, like in the first few words, I usually tune out. It feels like they're probably not doing the right thing. I think with Zcash, I think it's like quite, yeah. So actually, like it was fun seeing Tornado Cash relative to Zcash. I mean, obviously, I don't know. Yeah, there's some kind of unfortunate news about Tornado Cash today, but I think Tornado Cash was.
What happened today?
Oh, the Roman, the two co-founders got arrested by the DFS.
I did not see that. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's really, it fucking sucks. It's like, but whatever. Like they played with fire, I suppose. But I think Tornado Cash scaled in a way Zcash couldn't, And I think my interpretation, and I'm very interested to hear Tracy's, is that we probably won't. It's too much to have like privacy at like the base layer of the technology we use. It's more likely to emerge in like as like an escape hatch at the application layer, because there are always like technical and engineering trade-offs to bake privacy into the base layer, like Zcash was trying to do, or like any of the private smart contract platforms are trying to do.
Yeah, I think that like cryptographic hard privacy where no one can introspect is probably a bridge we won't cross. Like I think like there will be view keys on most privacy systems, but I think privacy in financial transactions, the way I think about it is like you care the most about privacy from your peers. Like you don't, if you're going to buy cigarettes or something, and you tell your partner you don't smoke, but you want to go buy your cigarettes, like having that in a public context is like unacceptable, and you wouldn't use this financial system. So it's important that you like have a financial system that can preserve privacy from your peers seeing the way that you're spending and using your money. I think that that's like actually a key thing for crypto to keep going. Like we take it for granted in our existing financial system that there's this inherent privacy from our peers. So we really have to have that, I think, for continued progress of like digital money. But yeah, I don't know that we'll have hard privacy at the base layer. I think it's probably like more of an application layer concern. And then
yeah, the point you said about like privacy from your peers, I think is actually really interesting. I think ties into a lot of the work Personae is thinking about when it comes to like reputation and human expression. So I guess, yeah, I'd love to turn it to that a little bit. Like, why is this Personae's focus, Lakshman, and like, why do you care about like the way human expression and ZK work together?
I think part of it, and there's like the philosophical answer to this question, and then there's like the more tactical answer to this question. And I'm going to start with the philosophical, just because that's where my head's going, and it's like a little bit more fun. But as like a internet user, I think it feels like if everything, like the start of like DeFi and start of like Ethereum adoption has felt like a little not human, because we sort of expect everything to be legible and introspectable. And I think that has changed the way I interact with the system, and it's changed the way many people interact with and use the system. I think it's a good thing in a lot of ways, I think there are really nice positive externalities, like Zach XBT, the guy who's like sleuthing the chain and sort of figuring out what's going on all the time. But it somehow, felt like the first few years of Ethereum for me has felt like a little less human, because it doesn't feel as rich if everything is sort of tracked. It feels cool that I have an ENS name that people know me by, that goes in many places. But it also doesn't feel like I have the full expressivity I get in the real world of, kind of like wearing different personalities at different times. And so that was like sort of, and I've always been drawn to, that drew me into crypto was, I think crypto meaning cryptography, is that it's a very like individually empowering, like technological revolution. It's like the individual can make statements that are unassailable by any amount of capital or coordination. And so the notion of like creating something that allows the endpoints to kind of feel more free and human online just felt very good and appealing. And I think, in things that we've put online, I think while we've done like research that is within ZK, I am careful not to use the term ZK, because that's not, ZK and privacy aren't necessarily what it's about. It's sort of like exploring what it means to kind of like have more nuance in your expression, because you have access to like this new cryptography and things like that. So that's the high level. I guess the more tactical is I personally am involved in like a few DAOs and a few different places, and I have a chain history that like in some ways I equate with part of my identity now, and I've been in a few situations where I wanted to say something or do something, but I couldn't quite say all the things I wanted to say, because maybe there's a balanced position, like there's like a there's like a there are a lot. I don't want to draw attention to the specific one I was involved with, but there's like always like these contentious kind of like protocol discussions in crypto where there are multiple sides, and it feels like there are like financial interests on either side, and it's hard to say. It was hard to say exactly what I wanted to say from specifically my voice, but I felt there were like credible things I could point to for specific things I wanted to say. And so if I could kind of like attach speech to like this thing that I was a part of on chain at this point in time, as opposed to just like all of Lakshman, that would have allowed me to say things I wouldn't have said otherwise. Relatedly, it's like I've experimented a little bit, as I'm sure other people have here, with like anonymity online and stuff like that, and it's just like very challenging to sort of like bootstrap with the reputation of an anon. And it's like, well, I'm creating reputation now and things that people probably will care about in the future. So why can't I use that? And it felt like a big limitation on the way I was using the internet.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a very, or Personae has a very opinionated stance on like where ZK fits into all this, but is experimenting within like those bounds, essentially. I guess, Tracy, as someone like building out like developer tooling for ZK in general, like what excites you about what application developers can build using ZK? What sorts of use cases like do you want to see built?
I wouldn't even say like we're still figuring it out. I wouldn't even say I have like this is the app that we need and this is why we're building this tool. I think I have this feeling more like we can't even experiment because it's so hard to experiment right now. And like the person that's going to invent the Uniswap of ZK applications, like I don't know what they're going to invent, but like with the tools that exist, it's going to be very difficult today. And so I feel like just kind of like raising the abstraction, making it easier to invent those applications, to experiment, so that in a weekend you can like try and tinker with something and come up with something clever. I think that's like the baseline to even getting started. And I guess if I zoom out like 10 years, the future of the internet, as it becomes more important to society at large, and like more of our reputation and like selves live on the internet, is needing to express these more complex interactions between people online and between applications. There needs to be infrastructure for doing this. So that's kind of what excites me. I don't see a future internet that's not more important to society. And I don't see a future internet that doesn't need like money as part of it. And I don't see one that doesn't need these complex statements about it in it. So those all make me very like, okay, this is important technology.
That makes a lot of sense. I guess I'd love to make sure, Graham, you get to ask your question as well. It kind of relates to this identity stuff, but just in general, like, why haven't people been, kind of like solving this like low hanging fruit? So, Graham, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
First of all, thanks, guys. This has been super interesting. I'm particularly curious that there's obviously a lot of tough engineering challenges that people are still working for, a lot of these high-level computational things, but there feels like there's some low-hanging fruit that would be nice to see more adoption, more usage. I was curious if you had any theories as to why we haven't seen like the very low-hanging fruit be addressed in a more substantial way, or maybe we just aren't really noticing it quite as much.
I think like the biggest product with product market fit using ZK was Tornado Cash. I think it had quite tremendous product market fit. It just had some certain implications from doing it in that way. So I think that it's clear that applications can be created with this set of tools. I think we're still just figuring out what they're going to be.
So I know we're in like the last few minutes here, but I would love to end, I guess, with talking a little bit more about both of your guys' like early stage journey. So like I mentioned before, a lot of the founders are kind of like in places where you guys were maybe at like a year or so ago, when you were still like trying out a bunch of different ideas, figuring out what's working, etc. I guess I'd love to hear like, how do you guys both gauge when to abandon an idea versus when to keep pursuing it? Like, what are the signals you guys both used to kind of like understand like, okay, this is kind of working and this is something I want to keep doing, or not?
I don't know if my approach is for everybody. For me, it's partly an exercise in like self-actualization. So like it matters a lot to me that I'm working on things that I care about working on and I'm interested in working on. So I've abandoned a lot of things that seem like, fine businesses on paper. Like I could turn it into something that probably sustains itself. But for me, I have such a short duration of like time to like ever do these types of things. And so it's really important to me that it's like passionate work for me, not just like productive work. And so, yeah, I've abandoned a ton of things because I wasn't passionate enough about it. And eventually, like, I think it's been a process of just like finding that thing that sparked my curiosity and made me really excited to keep going. Yeah.
Oh, I really like that. It's honestly such a privilege. I feel like most people in crypto would agree that we're all generally very passionate and values aligned. And I think it's like, yeah, such a privilege that we get to work on things that we're passionate about. Yeah, what about you, Lakshman?
Yeah, sorry, I was responding to the witness encryption comment. I will put comment on that because I actually did go deep on that earlier. Yeah, I think to me, like I think there's been sort of like this. I'm a big believer in sort of like the invariant about the future, sort of like the Peter Thiel kind of like Thielian secret kind of approach to building something really long term and really big. And I think that I've constantly kind of re-asked the question, do I still believe that thing is true? That thing is still true. And then the long term sort of like feels like it's still very obvious. And then the short term, when I sort of like have a good theory about the midterm, feels like it should be obvious. It's like make something that is useful to people, the people that we decided. So the midterm has changed a lot. Like who is the user and how does that user become an important user in the ecosystem over time? It's sort of roughly my mental model. And I think it's a mix of, I mean, so like, we haven't succeeded yet. So I don't know what that feels like, but I know we haven't. And so I think there's a mix of like, in terms of decisions we made so far, it's a mix of seeing that something that was like our best guess that feels like it was that would have fit in the hand would have fit into the glove if it was the right glove. I think part of that, like, I'm a big proponent of being a user for whatever you're building, obviously like dogfooding, all that stuff. I think it's still bizarrely underrated in this space. But if it felt like it was right, the glove, and it didn't do the thing we thought, then I think that's enough of a reason to discard. I think the other force is like looking around constantly. I advocate everyone to spend a lot of time on Dune, just trying to like understand what's happening. It's easy to kind of like be chasing trends, but there is also like the possibility that something interesting happens that is different from your mental model, and you want to make sure to incorporate that. And that sometimes in the process of incorporating something else, I'm like, oh, like maybe what we think about should be a little bit different. And so I think it's largely those two forces, the force of something new happening outside that changes the mental model about what the midterm of user is, or realizing that the glove didn't fit the way we thought it would, therefore like something was probably wrong.
I love that answer. That's awesome. I guess I'm gonna end with like one last question to you guys. And I guess like the first half of the question was like, what is an open problem that you are looking forward to being solved in the next 5 to 10 years within the ZK landscape? And then the second optional question is just what you want the audience to take away from this discussion.
I have a 5 to 10 year-ish view. I think of this as like VMware, like an emulated computer on a computer that has like hard privacy kind of baked into it and the ability to like share statements about that computer to other internet users. This is kind of my like general view of the progress in cryptography. It's just like interacting virtual cryptographic computers. And then takeaway, I don't know, I'll think about that one.
Yeah, for the first one, I think it's like kind of like a Moore's law type observation. I think one of the kind of heuristics we're sort of tracking and pushing on very aggressively is like the speed and sort of like ability in like a mobile device to make a certain type of zero knowledge proof about Ethereum state. I think when I started kind of working on this problem, it seemed intractable. Like we would never be able to do that in a mobile device. And it might, even if you did, your device would heat up and blow up and it'd take hours and hours and hours. And now we can do it in seconds, and it doesn't and so like, it's very obvious that this is just one of those things that will like be pulled down the curve. And I'm excited to see what happens when it's like zero knowledge proofs happen as fast as like Twitch emotes or something like that. Like it's sort of like, you couldn't have imagined TikTok when the bandwidth, like reality was such that only email was possible. And so I'm excited to see what we'll be imagining in 5 years, because I think the things will be just completely different. They're already different, like a year in. That's the thing I'm most excited about. And in terms of takeaways, we didn't talk about this too much, but I think it's like really important in a space like ZK or cryptography, or let's say blockchain more generally, to do the impossible problem of being both able to do research and read papers and talk to users and build product. And I think about, I think we have a small team now who kind of like can stably like kind of do a little bit of both, but it's like a very, very challenge. I think a lot of teams sort of fall into one degenerate hole a little bit too much, and either like don't keep up with the technology or build something pretty short term. I think it's like, at least in what I've seen, like if you can marry those two things, and sort of have both groups of people kind of like continue to respect each other for a long time, you'll make good stuff.
I love that. I also think, Tracy, your comparison to VMware was really fascinating. I think it's safe to say like the place where ZK is now is kind of where like cloud was decades ago. And it'll be interesting to see like when everything explodes and it's more usable, like what'll happen. But cool, we spent a good hour, 15 minutes talking about this. So thank you guys so much for coming in and just like shooting the shit and talking about ZK stuff. I hope for the fellows, you guys come away like really optimistic about like stuff happening in ZK. And obviously, if you have any questions, like let me know, post on Slack, and we'll get it to the right people. But thank you so much, Tracy and Lakshman. This was awesome.